Hello everybody and welcome to today's video where I'm going to talk about analysing structure in an extract, looking specifically at AQA English Literature Paper 1. So of course in Paper 1, the Shakespeare play and the 19th century novel, you're given an extract from the text and you're asked to analyse how something is presented in that extract and the wider text as a whole. Now the example I'm going to go through is taken from Macbeth, but you can apply this to any text for either section of the exam. So let's just imagine you're analysing this part of the text where Macbeth and Banquo meet the witches and they give the prophecies, and perhaps you're answering a question on the power of the witches or the power of the supernatural. One of the things you need to think about is where that extract comes from in the wider text as a whole and how that helps you inform your answer. You might know from my videos Freytag's Pyramid, which is a simple approach to analysing 5-act plays and novels. It goes from left to right chronologically and it says all texts start with the exposition, the introduction of the setting and main characters. Then there's an inciting incident, a catalyst for conflict. It builds up to the climax around halfway through and winds down to the ending. And we can apply this structural analysis to something like Macbeth, and this is always open to debate, by the way, but you could argue that it follows something like this analysis. Now, what you can then do, if you know the Freytag's Pyramid approach, and you don't have to use Freytag, some people use Todorov, but if you know a whole text structural analysis approach to any text, then when you're given the extract, you can ask yourself, where does this extract come from in the wider text in this structural approach, and how does that help inform my answer? So if I'm answering a question on the power of the supernatural or the witches, and I've got this extract, I'd think about, well, actually it is the inciting incident, and that might help to inform my answer. It might help me to think that perhaps the witches are powerful because the moment they meet Macbeth and Banquo is in fact the trigger, the catalyst for all of the chaos and murder and death that follows, and it does present them as powerful because they are the inciting incident in a tragedy. They are the moment where everything kicks off to build to what we know is the inevitable ending of a tragedy, lots and lots of death. But some people find that really difficult, and I want to suggest another idea as well, which is probably a more simple approach, which is just to ask yourself what happened before this extract and what happens after this extract. Now, a couple of days ago, I was listening to an Oxford University lecture online. I'll link it in the description on Macbeth, and the lecturer said a couple of interesting things which I think we can apply to our GCSE analysis. The first thing to talk about is throughout the entire play, we have this question of whether the witches do have power, whether Lady Macbeth does have power. Do these people persuade Macbeth to do what he does, or is he actually, set on doing it anyway and they just kind of encourage him? And that's something that there's no set answer on, and it's something that is interesting to explore, and I'm not going to give a definitive answer because I don't think there is one. But of course, if we look at this extract and we just ask ourselves, what happened before? What happens after? Well, there are a couple of things we can say. This is Act 1, Scene 3. In Act 1, Scene 2, we learnt how brave and ruthless Macbeth is, and we learnt that he was going to be promoted to Thane of Cawdor. Now, we already come to Act 1, Scene 3 as an audience knowing that. And this is the interesting thing, I think. As an audience, we know what's going to happen. We know Macbeth is going to be promoted to Thane of Cawdor, but Macbeth doesn't know it. And this is the bit that came from the lecture. I think it's so interesting. The witches essentially interpose in a chain of human actions rather than control those actions. So it's not that the witches necessarily are making anything happen. They're just the ones who communicate what's going to happen. We as an audience know that because in the previous scene, we've heard about this promotion. But Macbeth doesn't know that. And of course, that's dramatic irony. We see it throughout Shakespeare. We as the audience know it. So what we could argue is that structurally, the fact that the previous scene made the audience aware of the promotion that was coming to Macbeth shows a lack of power for the witches. Perhaps that they are, and this again is from the lecture, passive predictors of what will happen in the end. I think that's a fascinating idea, that perhaps they're not the ones that are making it happen, they're just able to predict what is going to happen. And of course we learn throughout the play when there are certain things the witches are unable to do, that perhaps they're not that powerful. But this all comes through analysing structure, whether you do it in the Freytag's pyramid approach or whether you think about just simple terms, what happened before, what happens afterward. And all of these things come through analysing structure, thinking about the order of the play, where things take place and why that is important. You can apply this sophisticated Freytag's pyramid approach, but you can also just think, what happens before, what happens afterwards, and does it help me to answer the question? So that's one way of looking at structure, specifically in AQA English Literature Paper 1, because you are given an extract. And you can apply the same to Jekyll and Hyde, Christmas Carol, whatever text you're studying for Section B. And what I would finish by saying here is, you're not just saying where it comes from and what happens before and afterwards. You've got to think about, does that play an important part in helping me to answer the question? So if you can't think of a way of linking that to the question, don't just write about it for no reason. Everything you write has to answer the question. If you found this video useful, please do subscribe to the channel.